Well, good morning, everybody. Today's kind of a big day. I've been working on a pole barn project. You can see behind me, and this is actually going to be a carport that can also fit a boat. And today I am going to backfill all the post holes with dry mix concrete. And I wanted to make a video because this is kind of the turning point for this pole barn technique. There's kind of two ways people start pole barns. One of the methods is they put all the posts in their holes, they backfill the posts right then, they do their best with strings and levels to get the posts straight, and then they build the structure. And I do use that for large buildings. For smaller buildings, and I'm thinking anything under maybe 24 foot in a long dimension, I find it much better, much easier, and I think you get a better quality result if you do not backfill those post holes until after you have the frame set up and squared. And so we're going to walk around and I'll point some things out, and we're going to talk about this. Okay, so here's the structure. This one is this frame is 22 feet long, about 13 feet across. And this is again going to be a carport, so you notice there are no horizontal girts going across the wall. I did put some on the bottom, mainly just to help me frame this up, but this is going to be a pretty open pole barn. And up to this point, I have not backfilled those post holes. That's going to happen today. That's kind of the last step in getting the frame put together. And so when I'm doing a structure like this, what I basically do is I start putting the posts in the holes. When I drill a hole, by the way, I use a 12-inch auger on a tractor post hole digger. I go as deep as it can go. That's typically 32 to 36 inches, depending on the ground and the terrain. And then I will pour a 4 to 5 inch thick concrete footing in the bottom of that hole. And so then I start putting the posts in the holes, and I'll prop them up temporarily with just long pieces of scrap lumber staked into the ground, just to keep them mostly vertical and prevent them from falling on me. And then as soon as I can, I will start knitting those posts together with a bottom piece across the posts, and then the top beams. And if this was a closed pole barn, I would be doing the wall girts as well. Those would be about every 2 feet horizontal, going up the wall. And so it's kind of a tinker toy technique where you basically get this frame together. As you're working through that process, you are actually squaring things up and checking things. And I use a combination of diagonal measurements and strings to get all the posts straight, get the structure square. And because I have those posts sitting on that little concrete footing in the hole, I can very easily move those posts around. I can whack them with a mallet to slide them just a little bit, or I can stick a pry bar down in the hole and pull against the post to scoot it one way or another if I have to move it a 1/4 inch or more. And what I like about this technique is that, right now, I've gone through with the strings and the diagonal measurements, and this structure is perfectly square top and bottom. And I don't have to fight posts that might be a little crooked, that might be, not perfectly level. And what that means is that for the next steps, when I go do the roof framing, or again, if this had walls, if I was putting up the walls, this frame is generally between it's probably about 1/8 of an inch, maybe better, accurate in all dimensions. It's a very square frame, and that's going to make for a higher quality result. It's going to make the roofing turn out better. It just makes everything turn out better if you can get a square frame to start with. So that's why I like this method. And so if we walk around and look, you can see, there's a post down in a hole, no backfill yet. It's very solid. It's very rigid because I've got this braced like it needs to be when it's going to be a freestanding structure. Braced for wind loads and snow loads and things like that. And so really the last step now is going to be to come around each of these holes, and some of these have water in them because we've had an insanely wet winter here. So what I'll do is pump out these holes, and I can pump them out down to about a ½ inch of water with a little impeller pump I have with a garden hose. And then I'll stick a shop vac in there and suck it as dry as I can, and then just start dumping the dry mix in there and tamp it down with a piece of rebar and a stick. And really the benefit of using dry mix is that once you pack it down in there, that post is very rigid and you can keep working right away. You don't have to wait a couple days for the concrete to harden. By packing it in tight as a dry mix, it's very high density, and you can keep working right away on the structure, not worry about disturbing those posts. And then the other benefit to dry mix, at least in the winter, I don't have to worry if it gets to be too cold overnight, or we have freezing temperatures. I don't have to worry about that messing up the concrete cure. The dry mix cures at a much slower pace. It might take weeks for that to fully cure, and that kind of gives it a little bit more immunity to freeze and thaw cycles. Now, there's often a debate with pole barns about, should you use dry mix or should you use wet mix concrete? There are occasions where I do use wet mix. Obviously, wet mix gives you better concrete in the long term because you are controlling the mixing. You can make sure all the ingredients are perfectly distributed when you mix up that concrete. You control the amount of water you put in. Those are all things you can't control with dry mix. You're just dumping a bag in there, you pack it tight, okay? So you do get very high density, but you can't control the distribution of material in that mix. You could have all stones in one spot for all you know. You can't control the amount of water. It's going to cure on its own over a period of weeks, however it wants to cure. And so, yes, wet mix would be far superior if you want to deal with it. But when you're talking about a pole barn, the debate usually isn't between dry mix and wet mix. The debate is going to be between dry mix and something else. And that something else is generally going to be the spoils that come out of that hole when you drill that hole. And there are some parts of the country where you can take that stuff, that spoils that you drill out of the hole, and use that to backfill the post, and it works just fine. Here in Virginia, with our clay soil, once you drill that stuff out of the hole, it's just a sticky, gloppy, just an awful mess. In fact, I try to get it away from the work site as soon as possible, because if it rains and it's just a hassle to have it around the work site. It'll get on your boots, it'll get on your ladders, it'll get on your tractor. So I just get the clay out of here. It turns out that clay, if you were to try and use it to backfill your posts, you can't really do it. It does not compact well again. And I've actually had engineering done on this. It would not support any sort of wind loads on the structure that would want to move the posts. And so at least here, you cannot use the spoils that come out of those post holes. And that's the reason we use concrete dry mix. It makes for a really nice backfill. It's convenient. It comes in 60 or 80 pound sacks that you can transport and put a little pile of sacks right next to these post holes to have them ready. It self-compacts for the most part. You can pack it in with a stick or a piece of rebar to get it real nice and tight. And it's just really the preferred alternative for backfilling the post holes when the spoils that you dig out are not suitable. You could also use something like a pea gravel, and that's very, very good to use as a post backfill in situations where you have soil that drains, because it will keep moisture from building up next to the post. Here in our clay soil, it wouldn't even matter. I mean, when you drill a post hole in clay soil, it's kind of like a big bucket. It holds water, as you can see. I mean, there's water and ice here almost to the top of this hole. And so, pea gravel is not going to help you here. So I'm going to go ahead and start pumping out these holes and backfilling them with dry mix one by one. I'm going to film doing that for one of the posts, and it gets repetitive, so there's no need to film more than that. And then I'll show you the finished result at the end. But you know, again, really, I want to highlight the benefit of this method. You know, leaving those posts free to move in the holes gives you a lot of flexibility while you're framing this up. Lets you get a very nice square structure. So you can do all your final checks, top and bottom, measure your diagonals, run your strings. You can get this structure really square and straight within about 1/8 of an inch tolerance, which is real good for a pole barn. Then you backfill your posts in and kind of lock everything in. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We've got that concrete put in that hole and packed in real good. I think packing it with a stick is really the key step. If you don't do that, the concrete mix stays kind of fluffy. It's clearly got a lot of air left in it. But when you beat on it with a stick or poke at it with rebar, it really helps settle it down and increases the density. And that's really the key to the strength here, is that you're packing that concrete in with a density equivalent or maybe even more dense than if you had done a water mix. Water's lighter than concrete. It actually lowers the density of the mix. So when you go with a pure mix, a dry mix, and you pack it down good and get the air out, you actually end up with higher density of concrete. So that's really the key. Get it packed in there real good. And this post now I'm horsing on it. It's rock solid. It's probably as solid as it'll ever be. And so I can keep moving on and go down to the next posts. And by the time this is finished, the posts and the footings will be really solid and rigid. Okay, so here's a couple hours later. I've got all the posts backfilled, and what I've done, what I like to do is if I have any extra sacks of concrete, I'll come back to each post and mound up that dry concrete mix around the post and shape it. And you know, in the future, that's going to aid in shedding water away from the post, because when posts rot, they always rot at the interface where the damp ground meets the air. And so anything you can do to shed water away from the post is going to help long term. And this is going to be covered by crusher run and graded, which will add additional slope. But just having that that mound right up against the post is really going to help. Now, you probably wouldn't want to even attempt to do this if you were to continue to be working around the site, or if you had a crew working on the site. But you know, in this case, I'm done for the day, and I'm not going to be back doing any more work here for probably 2 or 3 days. So that will give that concrete mix time to dampen up and take a set. And you can see over here in this corner, this is one of the damper corner posts. This one's already setting up pretty good.